in my monologue talking about the UNDP and the Bamenda Stadium construction. The UNDP and the Bamenda Stadium construction. You can find the images of that stadium right there on your screen. I will take you into my monologue and expose the fraud and the shame that is so-called the Bamenda Stadium. This is very important because you have the United Nations. The United Nations, that's supposed to be a neutral organization involved in that fraud. In an era where global institutions are expected to uphold neutrality, promote justice, and stand with the oppressed, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, has chosen a different path in the southern Cameroons. It has opted for complicity over conscience, convenience over credibility. What should have been a development partner has instead become a key player in a propaganda machine that seeks to erase a conflict without resolving it, without solving it. On May 5, 2020, amid a still raging armed conflict in the southern Cameroons, now widely known as Ambazonia, the United Nations Development Program signed a financing agreement with the government of La République du Cameroon to launch what they called the Presidential Plan for the Reconstruction and Development of the Northwest and the Southwest, that is referring to the territory we refer to as the Federal Republic of Ambazonia. This agreement outlined a budget of nearly 90 billion CFA francs, that is roughly 159 million US dollars. Yaoundé would provide a nominal 10%, and the remainder was expected from development partners under the UNDP coordination. At first, this initiative was framed as a peace gesture, a blueprint for healing war-torn communities in the southern Cameroons, Ambazonia. But behind the veil of noble intentions lies a disturbing truth. The UNDP's involvement in this project is not only premature and ill-conceived, it is profoundly unethical. The plan's fatal flaw lies not just in its questionable timing, so-called reconstruction efforts launched in the midst of an ongoing war, but in its total refusal to engage with the root causes of the conflict. Nowhere in the so-called Presidential Development Plan documentation is there mention of the forced assimilation. Nothing mentioned about political marginalization or the constitutional violations that triggered the Ambazonian quest for self-determination in the first place. Nowhere is there acknowledgement of the indiscriminate killings by La République du Cameroun, the mass displacement or destruction of entire communities by the La République du Cameroon's security forces. Instead of confronting these hard truths, the United Nations Development in the southern Cameroons has completely collapsed. In doing so, the UNDP has not only betrayed the people it claims to serve, but has undermined any prospects for genuine reconciliation or sustainable peace. The clearest example, ladies and gentlemen, of this betrayal by the UNDP can be found in Bamenda. The pictures on your screen tell the story, where the so-called development plan completed what it claims as a major milestone, the construction of a football stadium. It was unveiled with fanfare during a recent visit by John Ngute, Joseph Dion Ngute, not John, as a sign that so-called reconstruction is underway. But what stands in Bamenda today, as you see, is not a stadium. It is a monument to corruption and international complicity. The project's total cost, that stadium cost, is reported at 1.24 billion francs CFA, approximately 1.7 million US dollars. The UNDP contributed a staggering $1.3 million for that project, the stadium project, and the Cameroonian government and the Bamenda One Council providing the remainder. And yet, what that money has produced defies logic and decency. A poorly fenced field with substandard synthetic turf, no public seating, no functional locker rooms, and shockingly, not even field markings. The center circle, the goal, and the penalty areas, none are visible or visibly demarcated. It is by every measure a disgrace. Permit me to pose this question, this necessary question. Does this structure or stadium remotely resemble a $1.7 million facility? And if it doesn't, and it clearly does not, then another question must follow. Is the UNDP enabling fraud and embezzlement under the guise of humanitarian development? The answer is probably yes. The absurdity deepens when one considers the justification. This was supposed to contribute to the revitalization of the local economy, one of the so-called development plans. But how does a football field, barely functional, which will be rarely used, ladies and gentlemen, contribute to economic growth in a city where roads are impassable, markets are shuttered, and thousands still live in fear or displacement? How does it make sense to prioritize synthetic turf over the reconstruction of destroyed clinics, hospitals, schools, and homes? The conclusion is inescapable. The United Nations Development Program is not building the southern Cameroons. It is rebuilding the narrative of a regime that is desperate to appear legitimate. Its role has shifted from neutral actor to active enabler, from facilitator of development and progress to apologist for a failing state, a failing regime. That's what the UNDP has become. This is not development, it is deception. Even members of the regime, like Higher Education Minister Nalova Lionga, as you heard her in Bamenda, ladies and gentlemen, have publicly expressed indignation, shock at the appalling state of Bamenda's infrastructure, roads in particular. When even Yaoundé's loyalists can no longer deny the rot, how can the UNDP justify pouring $1.7 million in an empty cosmetics project like the stadium you find there? The actions of the UNDP in the southern Cameroons represent not merely a policy miscalculation, but an ethical collapse. The UNDP's silence on the underlying injustice, on the state of violence, the war crimes, the continued military occupation of Ambazonia makes it an accomplice, not a peacemaker. The presence of the UNDP in Ambazonia legitimizes the false narrative that peace has returned and reconstruction can now proceed, even as the guns still fire and the prisons still feed up. Let it be known, there can be no reconstruction so-called without justice. There can be no peace without truth. And there can be no development why the people of the southern Cameroons are denied their right to self-determination. For these reasons, the United Nations Development Program's so-called reconstruction program must be firmly rejected by every conscious Ambazonian. It is not a neutral initiative. It is a political tool disguised as humanitarian aid. It is a pipeline through which international money is siphoned to launder the crimes of the regime in Yaoundé. It is an insult to those who have lost their lives and a betrayal of those still fighting for a future free from domination and deceit. There will come a time, a moment to rebuild, but it will be when the war has ended, when the regime's atrocities have been accounted for, and when the people of Ambazonia are free to shape their own destiny. Until then, the United Nations Development Program is unwelcome in Ambazonia. Its projects are not solutions. They are smoke screens. Its presence in Ambazonia is not humanitarian. It is hostile. That means hostility against the people of Ambazonia. The UNDP must be held to account. Its rule must be exposed, and the people of Ambazonia must never forget the price of silence, nor the power of resistance.